Le Mazurier in the newsroom. 2 decades after the spread of multi-party politics across Africa, elections still often leave a bitter taste. Today we're going to be focusing on the Democratic Republic of Congo, where this Tuesday incumbent Joseph Kabila was sworn in for a second term. Now, excepting Zimbabwe's longtime president, Robert Mugabe, most of Kabila's peers stayed away. Foreign observers highlighting, quote, a lack of transparency and irregularities. As veteran opposition leader Etienne Tshisekedi prepares for a counter-inauguration Friday, we're going to be looking at whether democracy has made inroads since the last election of 5 years ago and focus on the plight of a nation that 14 years after the ouster of Marshal Mobutu still remains prone to chronic poverty, corruption, and endemic violence, enough to warrant the prolonged stay of the world's second-largest UN peacekeeping mission in the world. And yet, it's a nation that's rich in minerals, with a young, vibrant population. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at which way now for Congo. And joining us from Brussels, Raphaël Kashala of Etienne Tshisekedi's UDPS party. Thank you for being with us. Also with us, David Potty of the Carter Center, which monitored the vote. He's on the telephone from Atlanta, Georgia. And also in Atlanta, Laura Sier, who teaches political science at Morehouse College. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate, which you can follow on Facebook and on Twitter, where our handle here is at François F24. Now, you could say it's a case of parallel universes in Kinshasa. The president sworn in for a second term, but the capital's an opposition stronghold, as we can perhaps now illustrate with these women venting their displeasure Monday outside the U.S. Embassy.
We are fed up. We want the truth from the ballot boxes to emerge. We don't want negotiations or mediations. We didn't vote for mediations. We voted for one man, and that's Etienne Tshisekedi.
So Raphaël Kashala, your candidate, says he's going to stage a counter-inauguration on Friday. What's your strategy beyond that?
Our strategy is because the Congo, the elections has shown over the country that Mr. Tshisekedi is really popular and that all the votes have been for him. But as there was too many irregularities, many fraud, Kabila has taken, has inverted the votes for him. And the population will really go against this government. And I suppose that Kabila will not be able to govern without the will of the people, because the people will be all the time against what the government of Kabila will do, and we expect that this situation will go further for the...
So does this mean that you're going to be demonstrating in the streets? Are you going to go beyond that? Are you going to... what is your plan of action?
The people of the Congo will just go against the government, and they will resist the government of Kabila, and they will try to follow the orders of Mr. Tshisekedi, who is what the Congolese people consider as the real president.
All right, so for the time being then, no specific firm word on what you're going to do beyond Friday. But let me ask you, why not take your case, why not appeal it in the court system? Why not appeal the election result before the courts?
I suppose you have followed what has happened when Mr. Kamere went to the court. You know, the court has just rejected the appeal of Mr. Kamere. They did not even not considered. They didn't control anything. So the reports of the votes were not considered, and they have just taken what has been published by the the commission, the electoral commission, and they have published that as the real result of the elections. So there was this court is at the is Kabila's court. The person, the judge of the court are judges for Kabila, and they are working for Kabila. Kabila has named judges just weeks before the election began.
Took place.
So, yes, was placed. So this court, it was not credible.
All right,
it's
David,
really not credible.
David Patti, let me ask you to react to that. Do you think that it would have been a good idea for the opposition to appeal within the legal framework of the country?
Well, I think it's always going to be a question of political strategy. If one is the candidate or the party supporting a candidate, from the point of view of election observers, we certainly counsel in country after country that first of all, that a reasonable complaints process exists and be knowable and accessible to candidates. This is part of a country's obligation to establish a right to appeal for its citizens. Secondly, even in countries where, as is the case in the Congo, groups of citizens or political parties or other actors have reasons for lacking confidence in the judicial system, or in this case in the Supreme Court itself, which was the only body to which election complaints could be brought. The UDPS had well in advance expressed its lack of confidence in that court, given its composition by a great many individuals who were directly nominated by the incumbent.
And David Patti, do you doubt that Joseph Kabila was the winner? Do you think Etienne Tshisekedi might have won the election?
Well, as we've said in our public statement in an initial assessment of the provisional results as announced by CENI, that there are significant enough irregularities in the counting process, the tabulation process, and many highly improbable and questionable results in the provisional results as published, that it's not possible, in our view, to definitively state whether Joseph Kabila or Etienne Tshisekedi won these elections. We don't have evidence in the sense that we have a complete listing of all polling station results as counted in polling stations. We were not there in that kind of strength, and that certainly was one of the areas that political parties were encouraged to deploy their own witnesses so that they could collect precisely the original tallies from polling stations and use those to hold the Election Commission results accountable.
Laura Sié, your thoughts on who won the election?
I agree with David. We actually don't know who won the election, and there seems to be no way to really tell, given the highly questionable irregularities in some areas where you had over 100% turnout, or 99.9% of voters in a particular polling station voted one way or another. Those results are not credible, and given that none of the observer missions, not the Carter Center, not the political parties within Congo, the European Union, or the Catholic Church, which had the largest observer mission, none of them were able to cover all of the polling stations in the country. And so we just don't have a complete tabulation from any outside party other than CENI, and that makes it very difficult for us to know what actually happened. What is clear is that Mr. Tshisekedi's supporters do not believe that Kabila won the election, and in cases like this, perception is as important as reality.
Perception important as reality. For people who don't know much about Africa, Laura Sié, would you say that how volatile then is the situation now?
It's extremely volatile. You have security services deployed all over Kinshasa, as well as in major cities throughout the country. As you mentioned earlier, Kinshasa is a stronghold for Tshisekedi and his political party. So security forces have been preventing any kind of peaceful protest thus far. And that's going to pose a pretty significant problem. If people feel that they cannot protest in significant numbers in peaceful fashion, we know that that's when they often turn to violence. Most people don't want violence. I don't think Tshisekedi wants violence. But there's no telling what his supporters will turn to if they don't have another means of expressing their dissent. And so this is something to be very concerned about. And it's likely to get more dangerous as we move toward Friday and toward Tshisekedi's planned inauguration.
All right, so the buildup of tension there, perhaps. We are pleased to introduce with us right now another guest, Emmanuel Goujon, who covered the civil war in the Democratic Republic of Congo for the French news agency AFP. I suppose at the outset it was still called Zaire?
Yes, no, at the time it was already...
It was already the DR Congo.
Republic of Congo. It's Kabila who introduced this new name.
That's right. And today with Africa Global Approach, Emmanuel, we can listen to the words of the President Kabila a few days ago. He staged a press conference. More than 20 killed since the vote, picking up on what Laura Sie was just saying. But the president underscoring how less than 24 killed is a relative term in a nation that's known much worse.
Have you seen violence from the security forces? I don't think so. I don't think so. If we were to have violence from the security forces, you'll agree with me that we could have had tens, if not hundreds of deaths.
Raphael Kashala, how does he have a point, the president, there, saying there could have been a much worse crackdown up to now?
Well, there are many persons who's died, but who has not been shown because we have proof that there are people who still dying till today in the Congo, but the number of person who died is not the toll that is told in the media, because we know that there are many people who are dying. There are graves which have been found in the Kinshasa near Kimwenza, where people are in the mass graves, and on the internet you can show things like that.
Wait, hold on a second. Mass graves since the vote?
Yes, since the vote.
That's
yes.
a grave accusation. Where exactly?
Kimwenza. We have had messages on the internet from Kinshasa and images of graves in Kimwenza. Kimwenza is near Lovanium, near the University of Kinshasa.
All right, David Potty, on your end, have you heard any word of mass graves, and how do you feel as though the post-election violence has been?
Well, no, we haven't had reports of mass graves, but certainly. If there is anything to it, it's obviously, as you've noted, an extremely serious allegation or event. I think that the main concern, especially in Kinshasa, prior to my departure last week, someone described, when asked about the climate of the city, they said, well, calm but angry. And I think that there is a real volatility to Kinshasa in particular. It was evident even on election day. There was often extreme antipathy expressed on the part of voters and people assembled around polling stations towards CENI workers, towards the election workers.
Let me ask you about that, David Potty. We know that in some districts, I spoke to one person earlier who told me there were 1,200 candidates for the legislative elections. They were voting the same day. That's because each one of them got a stipend for running for office. How did it look to you, the actual poll itself?
Well, much of it was well conducted, and we've acknowledged where our observers saw procedures in conformity with the regulations and with the election law, but we also noted where we did see irregularities. I think one of the defining features of the run-up to these elections was the very date of the election itself and whether or not all the materials, especially the ballot papers, could be distributed in time. They largely were, but not everywhere they were needed, and not always in sufficient numbers. And so, right from the start, I think the seeds of potential discord were already there, especially around something as sensitive as the very ballot papers themselves.
All right, let's look now at a map of the Democratic Republic of Congo. On that map, you can see that it's a nation that is 4 times the size of France. And Emmanuel Goujon, when you were there's the map there. When you were in the east of Congo, how far did Kinshasa seem to you?
Very far away. The area of coverage I was supposed to work on was as large as Western Europe during the Cold War, so it was very huge. And Kinshasa was very far away in the sense that nobody has seen anyone from Kinshasa, from the government, in the eastern part of the Congo for sometimes dozens of years. And the people didn't have the feeling that there was a state even in that country anymore. For a long time, state workers, postmen, people like that, teachers even, were just living in their small village, surviving, in fact, thanks to the solidarity of the other people there. So the state as itself does not really exist as we think about it here in Europe or in Western countries, or even in some very well organized and developed African countries like Ethiopia, for example. In Congo, Kinshasa, it's a very different situation, and it's very difficult to say that there is really the presence of the state apart from the presence of the police and especially the army, all these armed forces being very present and very strong on the population in general.
David Patti, we have the description there of just the sheer size of the country. You were complaining earlier about the fact that you didn't have a lot of observers on the ground. You had something like 70, right? How do you observe an election in a nation this size? How can you even do it?
Well, it is always daunting. One of the compensation techniques, if you want to call it that, is we make a commitment to try to deploy observers as far in advance of an election as our resources will allow. And so we had teams of what we call long-term observers deployed since the month of August, who are mobile and so are able to cover a much larger geographic area. A second way to compensate is through coordination and exchange of information, and in some cases joint deployment plans or sharing of deployment plans with other domestic and international observers. And we made an effort to do that, in particular with the European Union's election observation mission, who also had long-term observers, and with observers, as you've noted, from the Catholic Church, for example, and through their network of domestics.
Laura Sié, so how credible are the findings of international election observers in a country like Congo?
I think they're about as credible as they could be. The international community did not adequately fund the observation missions, and organizations like the Carter Center, the European Union, they did the best with what they had, but the money was just not there. And so given the limited numbers of observers, given that the longer-term observation missions were maybe not as long as we might have liked, given that some groups were not even able to put many observers on the ground at all, it's about as credible as could be. I mean, these are neutral organizations. They have no interest in the outcome of the election one way or the other. They just have an interest in the credibility of the elections and the democratic process. But given that no one was able to cover all or even a majority of the polling stations, that does raise a credibility issue, especially now that we're in a situation of having disputed results.
All right. We're going to leave it there for part 1 of our discussion. But I want to thank all our guests for being with us. Stay with us. When we come back, we'll be taking a look at some of the stakes in the Congo as it goes forward.